Brian Levin is with the director, in fact, of the Center for the Study of Hate and Extremism at Cal State San Bernardino. And Errol Lewis is host, of course, at New York One. Gentlemen, this violent language from the right, this constant reference to guns, this hatred of elected officials. Now, Michael Kinsley, the brilliant writer, said the other day, he just challenged those who say there is no connection to Tucson. He's pretty tough. He says, constantly saying gold standard, constantly attacking government officials, constantly saying they're the other, the enemy, constantly talking about guns. Okay, this guy may certainly have mental problems. You can tell that, I suppose. But in this environment, are we safe to not see a possible connection in someone else's mind between the words and the possible violent action? Brian.
Look, I think that we shouldn't hang our argument on whether one particular deranged person responded to this plethora of violent calls. We had this guy Popolowski in Pittsburgh who murdered 3 police officers. We had numerous plots revolving around President Obama. We know that this kind of rhetoric, whether it affected Loeffner, is not healthy. There are 3 things that are going on here. One, we have a real demonization now of political rivals, democratic institutions and processes. We have exhortations, subtle and not so subtle, to violence, and we have the embrace of bizarre conspiracy theories. And what I'm saying to you is, well, the odds of it affecting this particular guy are pretty low, probably naught. Because he had contact with the congressman in 2007 and found her to be a phony, kind of like a Mark David Chapman thing. That doesn't mean that we should necessarily say that this is just, a green light, because there are a multitude of unstable people who are fanatic, who this will set a validating foundation for. And one of the things we know about hatred and prejudice and aggression is that there are printed circuits of stereotypes in the ether, in the atmospherics of society, and this kind of language defines who is an appropriate target for aggression. It might not have done it in this case, but it certainly has done it in others.
Errol, why do you think that all the talk that we've done on this program, and not that we're that empowered, but certainly we showed an example in that a montage of all the times that people in this program, regular guests, have pointed out the dangers of violent talk, of connecting guns to action, to connecting guns to politics, perhaps, the hatred level, the whole thing we're all used to now as part of this sort of bandwagon of the new kind of politics. Why does the right defend it? Every day, every hour since the horror in Tucson, they've defended rhetoric. Why don't they just say, yeah, both sides are guilty, we should stop talking like this?
Apparently it works for them. I mean, the talk show host that you referred to earlier in this show, I mean, these are people who have multi-million-dollar contracts. They have enormous audiences. They profit by giving speeches. They build power this way. I mean, if you had your choice, the average listener, not somebody who's crazy, but really just an average listener who's, sort of committed to a particular point of view, somebody who says, the other side's not so good, the other side needs to be beaten at the election, well, that's pretty good. Somebody who says they need to be destroyed, they need to be defeated, and finds all of these flowery ways of saying how evil the other side is, it's much better, it's much more compelling radio, it's much more compelling television, and it works. And that's the real irresponsibility, because the folks who take the paychecks and cash them and walk away and then say, oh, I had no idea anything like this could possibly happen, don't blame me for it, they're really being disingenuous, I think.
I don't want to say down and outer, but sometimes it's appropriate, Brian, and you're the expert on this. It seems to me, I listened to Savage for a while. I used to go home at that hour he was on, and he was so angry I became sort of enthralled by him. How can anybody be this angry every night? His hatred level of people who anybody's guilty of disagreeing with him, or anybody's a victim of something like AIDS, he would just trash them as victims. People with the wrong ethnic background, he would trash them. Even if it's his own ethnic background, he would trash them. The self-hatred, everything else involved, I was so enthralled by it, but after a while I said, I feel miserable. I'd rather listen to 60s music, turn on some kind of my favorite station, Sirius, listen to the 60s, because I'm tired of feeling miserable. Is it true that people who are really down and out, who are really miserable, really angry, do want to hear somebody who's miserable? That misery does love company, and that's why they listen to Mark Levin and Savage and those guys, because they're really down and out, and they love a really miserable character to share their time with.
Well,
Is that what's going on here?
Savage is a miserable character, and what's irresponsible of what he does is he points out particular ethnic groups and immigrants, and he frames everything as if it's a war. Look at your show. You don't call it war, you call it hardball. That means we get into
well,
the arena.
I see it as a sport sometimes.
It's a
because
sport,
it is.
that's right. It's a sport, and one of the things that from your experience, and I think this is important, and if people read your book like I did, you served as a cop at the Capitol, and you knew about respect for the institution and processes of democracy. And one of the things that I think is so loathsome about what's going on here is it's not that there's a substantive side or a position. What we're talking about here are characters who are the merchants of hate, who make their living not on looking for solutions, but who make it on destruction and demonizing folks. And by the way, we see this on the left. There were horrible pictures of John McCain, and there was Sarah Palin hung in effigy in West Hollywood, so we're not going to excuse that. But I think when it becomes an industry, a divisive industry that focuses on demonization, violence, and the exploitation of bizarre conspiracy theories, what do you expect with certain unstable people that are out there and already angry? This validates how they feel and directs where their aggression should go.